I'm sitting in front of a high-speed train on the Madrid Atocha train station. The train is leaving from Madrid to Malaga, and I'm supposed to get on board of that train, but for some reason I'm pinned on the bench right in front of it because I have this inner feeling, this gut feeling that I shouldn't get on board, that for some reason it doesn't really feel right. Now, moments earlier, I had left my apartment, which I was sharing with 3 friends. I was studying economics at the time and doing my 4th year, and I was supposed to leave for a weekend to Malaga. And the girlfriend of one of my friends, which we call La Bruja, which means like the witch in Spanish, because she had this, she was half black from the Caribbean, half Spanish, and she had this beautiful curly black hair, but she had this kind of voodoo thing over her. And that's why we call her La Bruja. And she walks up to me and looks me in the eye and she says, "You'll regret going to Malaga." And I was like, "What do you mean?" She said, "I don't know, I just have this inner gut feeling that you shouldn't go and that you'll regret it." And just looked at her and I really wanted to go, so I dismissed it and I just walked out the door. But here I am sitting right in front of the train and my own inner feeling is telling me the same thing that La Bruja was telling me. Something doesn't feel right. And so I'm having this discussion with my inner gut and my head when the guy blows the whistle for everybody to get on board, and in that split second my mind wins and I take the decision to jump on that train. The door closes and off I am. It's the summer of 1994 and a few hours later I arrive in Malaga, where a good friend of mine, Barbara, is picking me up. She's spending her holidays there, and I had agreed with another friend of mine, Jerry, to come by for the weekend because he was opening a bar in Fuengirola at the Costa del Sol. And so, Barbara and I and another friend of hers, we drive to Fuengirola, and it's around 11 o'clock at night in the evening on a Saturday. And we come on the boulevard. It's a 30-kilometer one-way street, and it's pretty crowded because it's July and in midsummer. And we spot a spot just right in front of Jerry's bar, and Barbara neatly parks the car, and I get out, I close the door, and then I hear squealing wheels and a big bang behind me, and I look behind me, I see this white car coming at high speed straight at me. I still try to jump away, but then bang. And the next thing I know, there is silence and everything is black, but suddenly, as if I'm slowly opening my eyes, I realize that I'm actually floating in space. And I don't have a body, I'm pure consciousness, and I'm just looking around and taking it in what is there, because I feel a complete unconditional love. It feels so warm, like a warm blanket has been put around me, and I feel a tremendous oneness. I feel one with everything that is. I am the oneness as much as the oneness is me. That's how it feels. I'm still an individual, but I'm also everything and completely one with the universe. And I remember just floating there and taking it in with amazement and feeling that beautiful, loving, warm feeling, which felt very serene and felt like home. And then at a certain point, I feel an energy coming close to me. It gets warm and it feels very familiar. And then I suddenly sense it's my grandfather. And I'm like, wow, granddad. And he's not, in his normal physical appearance, but he's just a ball of energy. And so am I, actually. I'm also just a ball of energy, and we just communicate and exchange energy. We communicate in ways like throwing energy balls at each other. And you suddenly understand everything that is communicated. It's such a beautiful way and so much more comprehensive than using words. And I love my granddad. My granddad saved my life once when I was 4 years old, when I fell into the pond beyond our house and I was drowning, and he had a gut feeling as well at that time to go look for me. And as I was drowning, I saw the bubbles go up and go completely to the bottom of the pond, and then suddenly I felt a hand and he dragged me out of there and saved my life. And now here he was again. I loved him very much, and he was a very educated man, but also a deep spiritual man, because he was a devoted Buddhist, and he always had that serenity and that calmness around him. And now he was here, and it was so beautiful to sense him. You know, I'd missed him a lot, I realized there. And we're just dwelling in space together for a while, and then he says or communicates to me that he needs to take me on a journey. And before I know it, we fly off, and we're flying through the air like two eagles, and we seem to fly over valleys, and it's very green, and there's waterfalls, and everything's so beautifully and vibrant in colors. And then we suddenly take a turn up, and we fly into the sky. And there, time and distance doesn't seem to exist, because in an instant we are close to a bluish planet, and there's two beautiful planets orbiting in it, and you see them in the night sky, and one has like a ring, like our Saturn. And as we arrive, there's a campfire, and I see a couple of people sitting around the campfire, and we come there. We also sit next to the campfire, and I suddenly see my grandfather now in his appearance, the way I knew him. And there's a couple of people sitting there in front of me, 3 people. And my grandfather says, "These are my spirit guides." And there's 2 light beings to the left as well. They're just, a silhouette of energy. And they're about twice the size as humans are. And my grandfather just continues to say that, I've been in a heavy accident, and I'm in the realm of in the spiritual realm where souls go and after they die. And I'm not dead. I'm gonna go back, but I am here to meet my spirit family and to discuss how things will go forward and what's going to happen. And he explains to me that we are all souls, and this is also not just my spirit guides, but my soul family, and that we have agreed before I came to Earth in a soul contract that I am about to learn some lessons. I came here to Earth to learn some very valuable lessons, and this accident is part of it, because that's gonna make me go through these deep lessons that I've taken on to learn. And I get to know all my these 3 guides that are in front of me, and it's an old Indian. There's a Greek, ancient Greek looking lady, like a goddess, and the other one looks like a Scotsman, and these 2 light beings. And they introduce themselves to me and explain what their worth is, and what they're, where they're guiding me in. And it feels very, very warm and loving, and I feel great there. I feel really at home, and there's this, great feeling of belonging, and there's this deep wisdom in this place. And I also see a man standing a couple of meters away, and when I look at him, I see, oh, that's Jesus. And I don't understand, because I've not been brought up religiously in any way, but still it's Jesus standing there. I wonder what he's doing there. My grandfather just nods at me and says, we'll go and see him in a bit. And we then discuss the lessons that I need to learn, and my grandfather explains to me that I will remember parts of this journey, because I will need to forget many parts as well, because if I would remember everything, then the lessons would not be valuable as they are if I don't have an idea where I'm getting myself into or what's going to happen. And I will remember the oneness that I felt, and the unconditional love, and that will be my beacon. That will be like my my guide to guide me through difficult times when I get back. And then my grandfather says, "Slowly, time to go, and I'd like to take you to Jesus." And he just brings me on to Jesus, and I stand right in front of his face, and he looks at me, and there's this beautiful loving gaze. Again, this unconditional love is coming from his eyes, and he doesn't say anything, but he talks with his eyes. Everything that he's saying is just coming in like an energy, and I understand his teachings. I really understand what he's about, not what the Catholic or whatever church made of it, but I understand his true message. And the kingdom of heaven is within, and I understand that we are souls, and that we that is our connection with oneness and with the divine, and that we all have that inside of us. It just really resonates with me. And then my grandfather, says that we need to slowly go, and Jesus just nods at me and as if saying, now you understand my teachings, and take this with you, and you can always connect with this energy that you have felt right now. He nods and like, you'll be good to go on your way. And then before I know it, my grandfather again takes me back to the place where the accident happened, and we arrive on the scene, and we're hovering in the air a couple of meters above where I was lying on the floor. And I'm lying on the floor with my belly down, and I see I'm really badly hit, and there's a lot of people around me, and there's panic, and I see that Barbara is sitting next to me. And then my grandfather says, it's time to go back, Michel. It's you still have a life to live. And before I knew it, I was just bang, back in my body as if I had put on a glove. And there I was, feeling my body again. And Barbara was caressing my head and my hair, and she was saying, we'll be okay, Michel, we'll be okay. But I heard in a tremble of her voice that, things were serious. And then the ambulance came. Somehow they scraped me off the floor, put me in the ambulance, and took me to the hospital. And on the ride, I was falling in and out of consciousness. And just remember entering the hospital, and it looked like a movie. Doors open, there's a whole team there, and rolling me into the operating room. And there's this lady, she's asking me a couple of questions, including my name, and then in the end, just before we go into the operating room, I ask her, am I ever going to be able to walk again? She said, well, we're going to see, Michel, we're going to see. Let's first save your life. And yeah, the next thing I know, I was in the operating room, and there was total blackness. And so I came back to learn some valuable lessons. And I guess the first valuable lesson that I was about to learn was just shortly after the accident. My friend Jerry had called my mother, and she had flown over right away from Amsterdam, because that's where I'm from. I'm from the Netherlands. And as she arrived, I was still recovering from a 10-hour operation. I was out of life danger. They did a really great job in Malaga, but my legs were still very, very badly hit. And it was a question if I would be able to keep my leg or legs. And my mother was a doctor, and so she was allowed to sit next to me in the ICU. And as she walked in, I was still unconscious from the operation, and she sat down next to me, and she said that my heart monitor my heart rate on the monitor went from a fast ping, 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 to a slow and steady ping, like ping, ping, ping. And I felt my mother there. I just felt that my mother was right there with me. I was still unconscious, but my being knew that, and it really calmed me because my heart rate, significantly lowered. And I remember waking up, and the first thing I see my mother looking at me, and I was like, wow, Mom, you're here. I knew I was badly hit, and then I was involved in a bad accident, but it was such a loving feeling. I felt this unconditional love that was going through me. It was the same unconditional love I felt with the oneness and with Jesus looking at me. And from that moment on, I understand what unconditional love is, and that we all need it as humans to feel that love and to be connected with it. And it was one of my first and beautiful lessons to understand and really feel unconditional love. Now, my brother came over, and they flew me back to Holland for me to be treated on more over there, because both my parents were doctors in Rotterdam, and they wanted me to be treated at home and also in the hospital that I was born and where they knew everybody. And I was out of life danger, but they tried to save my leg, and it was, in the 2 weeks that followed, I had about 10 operations. After 9 operations or so, I saw my leg dying off. I saw it getting black, and I was like, oh my God, this is not going well. Where is this going? And then, yeah, indeed, the next day, the traumatologist walks into my room and says, Michel, this is getting life-threatening because it's dying off, it's getting infected, and it could threaten your life. So tomorrow we're gonna amputate your leg above the knee. And it was quite a hard pill to swallow, I must say, because it's not nothing. And also the next day when they drove me to the operating room, I really felt like I was being driven to my execution. It was a bizarre feeling. And then the next day, you wake up without a leg. And I was, I needed to come to terms with my new reality. Now I was recovering pretty well, and I had connected with the oneness and with my soul, and that strength, that gave me a tremendous inner strength, and that was with me. Just like my grandfather had said, it would be my beacon, and it felt exactly that way. It gave me a tremendous calmness and a feeling somehow that everything would be okay. And although I was missing a leg now, and my life was turned upside down, I felt that enormous calmness. And I was hit by a drunk driver, a Swedish guy who was completely drunk. And on that night, he was sitting out with his girlfriend, and they got into an argument. And he just walked off angry, and she ran after him, and he jumped into his car, and she also jumped in the car with him. And they were continued arguing, and because he continued arguing, it was like, he stepped on the gas and started to drive really fast on the one-way boulevard of Fuengirola. And that was at the same time that I was getting out of the car. And then suddenly he loses control because he was driving like 100 kilometers per hour. It was really crowded there, so pretty crazy. And he hits the car on the right, and the car comes to me, and it was exactly the car that I was getting out of. And after that, he hit some 5 or 6 more cars and ended up on his roof. And he was lucky, or everybody was lucky, that he only hit me and didn't kill me, but that he didn't kill other people, because it was so crowded. Could have easily killed a couple of people that night. Now he was arrested. He was taken to jail, and he paid bail, and he was supposed to show himself every 2 days at the police station. But after the moment he paid bail, he bailed. And he left. He never came back, and they never saw him at the police station, and most likely he fled to Sweden. Yeah, I never heard from him. I never received a card, or he never called, or he never said sorry in any way. And that was kind of tough on my parents, I must say, because they wanted to help me as much as they could. My father would have given his life for me not to lose my leg, but they felt powerless because it was my thing to deal with. And on top of that, then this guy was completely drunk because he had like a bottle of vodka. He had drunk that night, and then he hurt me this badly, and then he never says sorry. So it was really tough on my father and my family. And I remember one day, this is about 2 weeks after I have lost my leg, my father and my brother come into the room to visit me, and my father takes my hand, and my brother's behind him, and he looks me in the eyes and says, "Michel, your brother and I have been talking, and we think it's a good idea that we go to look this guy up in Sweden, find him, and settle things with him." Now my dad was Bulgarian, and he had fought in the war because he was from 1923, and so he had some serious combat behind him. And I thought, he's gonna kill this guy if he sees him. He was so. Wow. And I told him, "No, please, I don't want you to do that." And in that instant that I'm thinking that and saying that, I had a epiphany. It just really, like, something came over me, and I realized that, what point was it actually to be angry with him? Why would I be angry? Because I needed all my energy for me, for my own recovery. And by being angry or having feelings of hatred or blame towards this Swedish guy, I was giving away my energy. And, he would have an influence over me, and I would be wasting it on him instead of using it for myself. And in that moment of clarity, I suddenly it all slid off of me. All the energetic load and all the anger, it just slipped off of me, and I forgave him. And I looked at my dad and I said, because Dad, I have just now forgiven him. And it was amazing because my brother and my father, they just looked at me and they felt the sincerity of what I was saying. And they just nodded and said, okay, if that's the case, then we'll let it be. And they never mentioned it again. And I realized in that moment the true power of forgiveness, that it's actually the biggest gift that you can give yourself. Because if I would not have forgiven him then or until today, then he would still have, an effect over me. He would still have power over me, because at the time of the accident, we formed an energetic cord together. He would have influence over me by me just feeding my anger and blame and hatred. He would still have an influence energetically over me. And as I forgave him in the hospital there, I cut that energetic cord and I took back my strength, my own power, and I took it into my own hands. And since then, he has never had an influence over me. It's quite bizarre because, he took my leg, but it completely slid off of me, and I've never looked back at it in any anger or hatred. It was just, the memory was still there, but the energetic load was completely gone. And I've realized that true forgiveness, this is the way true forgiveness happens, that it just slides off you and all the energetic load, it takes it with it. And I also realized that it's beyond, you forgive beyond the ego and beyond the mind, because the ego wants revenge. It wants, I need to give you something back in return for what you have done to me. But that's pure ego. The soul sees it from a much higher perspective, and I just got in touch with my soul that day, and it just made me forgive, and it just happened to me. It was no willpower to it. And so that was the next lesson that I needed to learn, the power of forgiveness. Now, after a while, I got dismissed from the hospital, and I needed to recover, find my life again. And eventually, I had to come to terms with my own reality, with my new reality, and I got my own apartment and started to pick up my life. But, I was 22 years old at the time, and the first thing that comes to mind is, how are girls ever going to look at me? Am I ever going to be able to get a girl, or is a girl ever going to be able to fall in love with me? Because, I'm mutilated, I'm missing a leg, and so there was this fear of rejection. And it was actually my core fear at the time, because I had to be vulnerable all the time. I had to show myself, in my weakness without a leg to a girl, just something you cannot hide. And as I was struggling with the fear of rejection, I got from the other side, I got a vision, a beautiful vision about fear. And it was in a dream, and I remember it still so vividly today. And I was in this dream, I was standing in a little cabin in a house. It was just 4 walls, there was nothing there, a few windows, but it was dark. And it was with 4 or 5 friends. And we're just standing there, not saying anything. And then suddenly the floor starts spinning, and it just spins away and just drops away underneath of us. And we fall into this dark abyss, and we just keep on falling, and we're screaming, and it's so scary because it feels like we're condemned to fall for eternity into this black abyss, and there seems no end to it. And we're just falling and falling and screaming until there comes a moment that I think, okay, if I'm going to be falling here for eternity, then why scream, right? And I just surrendered to the fear. And I just surrendered to it, and with it, suddenly, all the fear was gone. And before I knew it, bam, I was standing with both feet back on the ground in a little cabin. And I was like, wow. And suddenly the sun started shining, and I heard birds singing outside. But my friends, they were still falling. They're continuing to fall and screaming. And I remember telling them, guys, I know the secret. You need to surrender to the fear, and by surrendering to it, you go through it, and it dissolves. And suddenly, boom, boom, boom. My friends were standing next to me, and we all looked at each other like, wow, what the hell was that? And but mostly, everybody was happy that it was over, because it was extremely scary to be falling for eternity. Now, this vision really helped me to cope with my fear of rejection and to be vulnerable, to show my vulnerability. Because on the one hand, it's a curse and a blessing. It's a curse because I need to show my vulnerability constantly. I need to show myself as I am. Because there's just no avoiding it. My leg's never going to grow back on, and there's always going to be a moment that I need to show myself as I really am, and that's showing myself in my complete vulnerability. And I cannot turn it off. I always have to sooner or later discuss it or show it, and that's the curse. But at the same time, the same thing is a blessing, because I cannot hide it. It's not something that happened to me that I can hide and nobody needs to know. No, it's there forever. And so I always need to show myself, which made me realize that it's a strength, because constantly I had to surrender to the fear in order to be vulnerable, to show my vulnerability. And then it actually made me authentic. It made me strong, and it made me accept myself for who I am. And that's the beauty of vulnerability. To show your vulnerability is accepting and loving yourself as you are, and not being afraid to be rejected. And that's a real big strength. I noticed that things change because people like people who are authentic and who dare to be vulnerable. So vulnerability has been seen as a weakness, but my lesson was to learn that it is one of the biggest strengths that you can have. Now, my biggest lesson was yet to come, because I was recovering, doing well, and of course from time to time still struggling, but that's only normal, because if something this intense happens, what I've learned over the years is that it doesn't, it leaves a trauma, or it touches you on 5 levels. And it's not just on the physical, on the emotional or the mental level, but it's also on an energetic and spiritual level where it touches you. So it takes time to heal yourself on all these 5 levels. And I had taken it on to help people, and I was still very much connected with my soul, and felt that oneness, which was beautiful. And I decided that my purpose is going to be to help people to find their own inner strength in their soul, so that they don't have to struggle as much and suffer as much, because once you're connected with that, you feel a great inner strength. But after a couple of years, my brother came by from Prague. He had moved to Prague, Czech Republic, and he came by with a business idea. He said, Michel, why don't we start a business together? I have another friend. And I said, yes, I'm going to go. And I started a business. And the years that followed, I was very focused. It brings a lot of stress to start your own business, especially in the beginning. Am I going to survive? Are we going to make it? After that, it became, the next focus started to be making a lot of money, becoming successful. And I was looking more to become a millionaire, and helping people was suddenly secondary. And I told myself, once I'm a millionaire, I will start helping people. But I got more and more in my head, and more out of my feeling, and more out of touch with my soul and with oneness. And in hindsight, that was one of the most painful things and the most difficult lessons to go through, because I was just traveling, working hard, being stressed, and started drinking a lot, using drugs, a lot of sex, everything. And I was just got into this negative spiral, and just being in the head and thinking in the head, and losing that touch with my true essence, with my soul, until I came to a point that I didn't even see the point of life anymore. I was lying in bed at night and thinking, what's it all for, and thinking of ways how I could possibly step out of life. And then I really thought to myself, Michel, what has happened to you? What has happened to that beautiful, brilliance that you have inside of you, that beautiful light that you have, or that you had, and that you were shining, and there's nothing there. It's just like a pilot flame at this very moment. And I said to myself, okay, this is enough. I've hit rock bottom, and I decided to go find that connection with my soul again, and started doing all kinds of things, for personal growth. I did all levels of NLP to become a trainer in that, and I did meditations, breath work, and I got in touch with ayahuasca, and ayahuasca really opened me to my soul again, and I started seeing things very clearly, because I finally got in touch and in that deep connection again with my soul and with oneness. And I realized that it felt so empty, that there was such a void, that if you are not in touch with it, because I was, in touch with it and I lost it, and to not be in touch with that oneness is like not having a mother, not having known that unconditional love, or not received that unconditional love. And it leaves a void, it leaves a big void. And there are so many people walking on this planet that have never encountered their souls, or don't know that they have this deeper inner strength. And so they also have this void, and they're just trying to compensate for it with whatever, pleasures we have in this world. And so that was true suffering for me. And that was my biggest lesson, to understand the suffering if you have lost that connection with the true and deeper essence of who you are. And as I was reawakening, because it was really a reawakening, things started to become very clear. And suddenly I was, in Ibiza on a retreat, and suddenly my grandfather appeared to me again. And he, I was really like, oh, granddad, here you are again. And I remembered him exactly everything that had happened during my near-death experience. And he explained to me, you've learned your lessons, and now you are ready to open up and to remember everything, and to start living your purpose, which is to let other people and souls understand that they are a soul, and let them connect with that oneness, so that they don't have to suffer because of the void of the missing link that they have deep inside of them. Because we are all souls, and we all come here on a journey to fulfill our contract, or the things that we have agreed in our soul contract. And we need to suffer sometimes to learn the lessons, because if the lessons are deeply embedded in the suffering and in the pain. And that's what I have learned. That was one of my biggest lessons that I needed to learn, because our biggest gifts every once in a while come brilliantly disguised as our biggest nightmare, but they are not our nightmare. They are the lessons. If you don't suffer and don't have the pain, if you give in to the pain, you can continue to suffer, but they are full of life lessons. And that is what I have learned, to deal with all these things and learn my lessons, because it has made me authentic and strong and capable of dealing with almost anything. And money suddenly is not so important, because money can come and go, but your soul is eternal and is here to stay. So we all need that connection with our soul. If we get in touch with that, and we're able to put our egos aside, because our ego just wants more and wants pleasure, and it always compares itself to others, and by doing so it puts itself on a ladder and is always saying, I'm better than you, or I'm worse than you. And so you get a feeling of not being good enough. And it also gives you a feeling of being separate, because that's what the ego does. And that's where I felt that void of being separate from oneness. But we are so much more than our ego. So if we learn to transcend that, and to understand that we are this multi-dimensional being that is, eternal, and that is connected with the oneness, and that we see our own divinity, then we become really authentic, and we start to live the life that we are supposed to live. And we learn the lessons that we are supposed to learn, and that we agreed with our soul family to learn in this lifetime. And we all need to awaken to our souls, so that we all get into a higher vibration and a higher state of consciousness here on this planet, because this planet is suffering, and we need a paradigm shift where a lot of souls start to recognize that they are indeed souls, so that we pull up humanity, so that we can transcend into a new era where there's a big paradigm shift, where we can live together on a much more higher conscious level than we are doing today. And that's the biggest lesson that I had to learn from my near-death experience. And I'm happy to have been able to share that with you today, and hopefully it is inspiring you a little bit to see your own divinity, and to see the great beauty and beautiful soul that you are.